Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. This one's coming out on Thursday night instead of Friday because to be honest, I'm working on a really hard video and I'm having a hard time concentrating and I just want to do something else. Besides, it's snowing here in New York, so it's super distracting. Can't quite see it, but it's kind of neat. First snow of the year. Everything's I don't know. Everything's preventing me from concentrating well enough to do a good video, so I'm going to sit here and chat with you lovely people about the Q&A stuff. So let's jump right in. First up, Adam W. had a good question about the Game Boy interface boot discs. But before I answer the question, I just want to be clear that the things that I'd previously talked about and the answers to this question are all my personal wishful thinking, stuff that I would like to see. It's not something that's already been talked about, and this is 100% Extrems' project. So this is, my answer is me as a fan just talking about things I would like to see. But he wanted to know about the idea of having a Game Boy interface boot disc made from the factory so that you could use them on non-modified GameCubes. So any GameCube, it would boot like a real disc. And Adam wanted to know if there's no other easy means of burning that. And is the Game Boy interface software still being worked on frequently enough to merit waiting for a more final version? So what I can say factually about that is that no, you can't at home burn a mini DVD that would be playable in a non-modded GameCube. Now you could use Action Replay boot discs and all that other stuff, but I'm just talking about there's no way at home to make a disc that you could throw into any GameCube. You would have to have it made with whatever means the Action Replay team does, because it's not an official game, but you know theirs still works on everything. So I would have to reach out to them and really, you know, that's something that it might be too much of a pain. It's just my own wishful thinking. And the second part of your question is, I believe Extrems said that there is an eventual goal to have like an ISO boot disc, but he's far away from that. Now, things change all the time. Maybe he'll come out with something tomorrow. Maybe it'll be 5 years from now. But I just remember him saying that there was eventually a goal of 1 boot disc as opposed to 3. But that's just not how it works right now. So even if we were to hypothetically make all this stuff happen, you know, according to the person that created it, it's not in a place that it's ready for that yet. But once again, it's my wishful thinking and hope that someday I could just buy a Game Boy interface boot disc, and if there's anything I could ever do to help make that happen, just sign me right up. The importer asked, I don't have room for one more book. Do I live in a shoebox? No, I obviously have room for another book, but it's never one more book. It's, oh, that one looks cool too. Oh, what about that one? Oh, I'll get around to reading that other one soon, but let me get this one too. And that's the downward spiral I try to avoid. So, yeah. I mean, it's my choice to live in a place where it's like $10 million a square inch, but what can you do? Kyle Gamblin asked a question that I do not have the answer to, so maybe people could chime in down below. But he asked, do the 8-bit do controllers and receivers work on multi-taps? So the Sega Ness and SNES multiplayer controller adapters. And I don't know, I've never tried one. I would assume that as long as the voltage is the same, so it had enough voltage to power the receiver, that it would work. But that's something that you'd really have to do. Or you really just have to try and see if it works, and it might not even be consistent. It might work on NES but not SNES or whatever. So sorry I don't have the answer to that one. Scralings asked, who did your intro video? I love it so much, I actually get excited every time I start one. Well, thank you very much. My buddy Kenji did it for me, and that's actually how I met Kenji. He emailed me out of the blue and very politely pointed out some very bad mistakes I was making. One of the mistakes I used to make before I started using a lav mic was that, you know, occasionally I would tap the table or, you know, get all excited and get accentuated, and I'd bump into stuff. And I used to have well, I still have it, but I used to use exclusively the Yeti mic, which is awesome. And same with another audio recording microphone, like for singing audio. But when you have this on a table and you bump the table, it's the same as if you're tapping the microphone. So that was one of the things he pointed out originally, was that if anybody's listening on a computer with a stereo with a subwoofer, every time I bump, the room shakes. So he gave me a whole bunch of tips like that, and then he said, by the way, what do you think of this? I made you an intro, and I lost my shit. I could not believe that he had done that. I thought it was incredible, and I got so excited. And I said, and he put some stock music to it, and I said, hey, is there any way that you could use a song of mine that I love? I wrote, pretty much every note to this one. Will you use this? And that's kind of what sparked me to do the 8-bit version of it. So then I swapped that out. So that's kind of the origin story of the intro video. And now Kenji's a buddy of mine, and a lot of the tips, a lot of the stuff that you see where I've gotten better was a direct result of me asking him questions and him taking the time to help. So that's why I always try to give him a shout out anytime somebody says, hey, look, your videos are getting better. It's usually tips that he had given me a while back that I'm learning how to implement. So he's a professional video producer, and I think he's really busy because there was a few times other people had offered to pay him to do their intros as well, and he didn't have time for it. So if you're looking to have your own video done, I could try to put you in touch with him, but he's usually swamped, so no guarantee. But yeah, thanks for asking, and I smile every time I think about that because I had no thoughts of getting an intro. I wanted one, I just wouldn't even know where to begin, and when he sent me that, I flipped out. So I'm glad you like it. I'm glad other people like it as well. Next is a couple of questions from my buddy Chris from Belgium. I'm just going to kind of run through them instead of read through the whole thing because he's got a couple of questions in here. First, he said, is there any solutions people are working on to connect original discs or cartridges to the Mr. FPGA project? I don't think that's something that people are working on now, but they're building this hardware and they're writing these cores with that in mind as an eventual goal. That way you'd be able to in the future. So I think the short-term focus for the Mr. is just getting everything working, and then they're going to start to branch off to other stuff like that. He asked, what about using original keyboards? So that's one of the things that was discussed when making controller adapters, is that while the USB port that's on the I/O board up top, it's technically a USB format, but that's just a direct serial input, so that you would have technically a lag-free, or I think they said it was under 4 milliseconds, so definitely not detectable by a human. So let's just, for this purpose, call it a lag-free solution for all controllers, which would also include things like keyboard adapters for Commodore 64, TRS-80, PS2, whatever. And in fact, maybe a PS2 keyboard is something, a keyboard port is something that might even be useful to have on that cartridge, or the controller port upgrade whenever that comes. Also, questions regarding the GameCube. He really wants solutions to play on a 31 kilohertz CRT. So he's wondering, what's the best solution? Is it a dual solution? Is it the component cable that Insurrection announced? And it really just depends on in my opinion, it depends on how many places you'll be using this. So if you have, for example, one projector that requires RGB, HV, VGA, and 31 hertz only, I would say that at the moment, maybe the cheapest thing to do would be buy Insurrection's Carby for only $75, and then get one of those 10-DAC HDMI to VGA converters. And that way you could just have the one connection you need right now, super cheap, and you don't have to worry. The downside to that is if you ever wanted RGB, meaning RGBS, or component video, then you would then have to buy another solution. Another trick for that too is if you're running the HDMI cable from the GameCube to the projector, put the adapter as close to the projector as possible. So the digital signal is what travels down the cable, and your analog signal is only, a short thing. And in fact, I believe there's a few HDMI to VGA converters that are decent quality that plug directly onto the VGA port and then powered by some kind of external power adapter. So that would, as long as that works for your setup, that might be best. For myself personally, I might pick up the Insurrection component cables just for the heck of it, but I think it's actually Eon's dual product that I'm going to be using mostly, because It's something that I could plug into any GameCube, regardless of if it's modded or not. I could just grab it and bring it with me, and it could use the Wii component cables and the Wii RGB Scart cable, and has HDMI out. So for myself personally, I think that would cover everything I need. But don't forget that I do way more testing than I do playing. So, the thought of your average person needing every one of those signals on a regular basis, not going to happen. So that might be what's best for you, but kind of just think about it, and also always gauge things on availability, right? So Eon's already proved that when they put out a product, it's ready for sale, which means I would guess that their December ship date of their dual product is spot on. The Carby's already in stock and shipping, and Insurrection's been pretty good about their planned release dates as well. So I guess just keep all that stuff in mind and kind of figure out the solution that's perfect for your setup. Armed and Overclocked asked if I plan on adding a section to the website for the Mister. Already did it. Just kidding. This is more of a placeholder for people to know where to buy the FPGA device itself, a good, cheap USB hub that would work, and some of the other stuff. But yeah, that's absolutely in my plans to continue to update that and add a lot more information. At the moment, it has links to the GitHub where you could find all of the info you need on it. But the goal is to have a simple reference page that people who know nothing about the project can go to and find out all the info they need, and then go back to the GitHub page for all the crazy in-depth stuff. Whenever there's a place like this, a place like their GitHub page where there's so much good information available, and a lot of people continuously updating it. I try not to recreate people's efforts, but I do want to step in and just try to still be the middleman and introduce people to it in a way that any, even little bit of a nerd could walk in and understand what's going on with it and how to use it. Chris Syme wanted to give everybody a heads up that he ordered the STS Ness from Jack DIY, the place that VoltARS recommended. And he said the first thing he did was crack it open and find out that it's using the older hardware version labeled F, which would need the MSU1 audio mod to get the proper levels and the clearer audio. He wants me to let everybody know just so they're aware before they buy. And this is one of those things where I honestly don't remember where VoltARS said that, but I do remember him saying it as well. The STS Ness is an open source project, but the last revision of the full documents to make your own that were posted were of revision F, not the latest version with the audio fix on it. I believe the only place you can get the latest version is licensed resellers like Stone Age Gamer, or Crix, or any of the places that are linked from the Crix website. So anybody that wants to order the much cheaper ones from, Amazon, AliExpress, Jack DIY, whatever it is, it's not like you're getting a bad piece of hardware. It's just that you're getting an older revision that you would have to upgrade. And I did find one a few years ago where MSU1 audio didn't work at all until you added the upgrade to it. So it's not like it came out at the wrong level, it just didn't work. So for myself personally, SNES is my favorite console, and when it comes to actually playing, I don't like to have to tinker. I like to tinker for the website and to learn all this stuff, and I love working on this. But when it comes down to playing a game, I hate the days where I have to sit down, I start playing, and then I make 5 more trips back and forth to my computer or my soldering station before I'm able to get it working. So my own personal opinion is I would just get it from Stone Age Gamer or somebody. But if you like to tinker, you don't mind situations like that, then yeah, maybe save yourself $50, buy it from one of the other places, and then make your own MSU1 audio mod for it. I'll leave a link in the description, but I have everything on my site that shows how you would do that and where to download the schematics to get the boards made for free. So the schematics are free. Obviously, I have to pay to make the boards and stuff. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And that's also kind of why I don't put links to those cheaper places on the website, just because I don't want to have people worry about that. If you're going to spend that much money on something, I'd rather have your average non-tech nerd pick one of those up and just have it work out of the box. Bad Reality had a really good question. He said he just finished listening to the interview with Save On Pat, the Sony BVM tech, And he was also intrigued that the inside of the 1000-line monitors have the same tube as the 800-line monitors. And he was wondering if it's true for the 14-inch. To be honest, I asked Pat about that off camera before, during, and after the interview, and I still do not grasp what it was that he was talking about. What I do know is that it's similar like Intel with their processors, where Intel would do a run of, probably 10,000, and they would pull out randomly 100 of them and test them. And if the processor speed is, let's say, 3 gigahertz, and all 10 were passed every test at 3 gigahertz, all 10,000 would go down the line marked as 3 gigs. But if they pulled 10 out and just one of them wasn't clocked right, had some kind of issues, they would test that one at 2.8, let's say. And if that worked, they would mark all of the processors as 2.8 or 2.4 or whatever, just to be safe. At the end of the day, it saved them a lot of money rather than try to go through and test 10,000 processors. So in actuality, if you were buying a 2.4 gig processor, there was a good chance you were actually getting a 3 gig that could be overclocked, run cooler, everything's great, or you could be getting a 2.4 that, is just a 2.4. So that's the analogy that we kind of settled upon. I don't remember if we said that in the interview before or after, but that's kind of the analogy that we thought was closest. But the bottom line is, I have close-up pictures. I used the Super Mario World title screen, and I would take a picture of the R on different tubes, and I could absolutely count the line difference in different tubes. So while I don't think I tried, I know for a fact I didn't try the 20E1U, but I did try the D32 versus like my PVM, and there's very clearly less lines, no doubt in my mind. So this is something I want to research a little bit further. I really don't understand, I just don't understand the concept of how there could be less lines on one if it's all the same tube. So I'm not really sure how that goes, and I guess I've just been rambling for 2.5 minutes, and I should have just said I don't know, but I'm on it. I wanted to make that analogy, and I'm going to go through and take a bunch of pictures of different models, and I'll try to find out to the best of my knowledge what it is. I think another good thing to do would be take a few different tubes that, or models where Pat said the same tube was used, and take pictures of the Mario World title screen on each one, and go through and see if I could see differences on those. And I'll leave a link down below to anybody who wants to zoom into the pictures to count the R's themselves, because it's something that kind of did intrigue me, and you could definitely see the difference. Porkchop Express 85 posted a question about VoltARS PS1 video, and based on the description, I think you got a little bit of this wrong, no offense, so let me just run you through it, and if I misunderstood, please let me know, and I'll redo it next week or something. But basically, one of the things that VoltAR had talked about in his video was making the composite video or S-video or both outputs of a PlayStation 1 output C-Sync, not those other two signals. And this is for the purpose of people that have equipment that require C-Sync that won't work at all with composite video, or for people that are using cheap unshielded cables that want to make the image look nicer with less interference. So from the purpose of that, what he essentially did was sever the traces on the board, run C-Sync from the chip itself that generates it, the raw signal, over to the multi-out. And then I believe in his video he used components that were already on the board to do this, but what he's basically doing is just adding a resistor and a capacitor before it hits the multi-out. And just a quick correction to your statement, the little line on those capacitors that he used is negative. You always want the negative side of the capacitor going towards the multi-out, not towards the inside of the console. That solves a bunch of problems. It's still compatible with all cables that sync on composite or sync on S-video. That includes the HD Retrovision cables. It's, for whatever reason, if you have one of those cables that breaks out composite for light guns, that still works because light guns for PlayStation use sync, not the whole composite signal, so that's perfectly fine. And if you have one of the other PlayStation consoles that has composite video right on it, it kind of seems like a good mod, because if you were going to use composite, you'd probably just use this, and you might as well just have everything coming out of the multi-out as pure C-Sync. So my only opinion on this is that I wouldn't bother doing this mod on a PlayStation 1 unless you really needed it, because the reason I had liked it on the PlayStation 2 so much is by doing that mod on the PlayStation 2, doing the complete mod allows you to get all signals, including 480p, over the RGB cables. You wouldn't need to switch over to component video. Whereas on the PlayStation 1, they don't offer 480p at all. And the only advantage I could see is, yeah, if you're using really cheap cables, you won't get the composite video interference. But even if you're using S-Video that doesn't have any video interference on it, the only reason that you might want that is if your target device requires C-Sync. So some monitors do, I think some Extron crosspoints do, so that makes sense. But if you're using a standard setup, like going through a G-Scart switch or into the OSSC, it's just not something you would have to worry about at all. Jens Jacob Christensen said that he needs more ports for his 16-port Hydra Scart switch. Love it. And he wants to know, should he get another Hydra? Should he go for the G-Scart? And would they work together? So I have a few opinions on this, but just to answer your question directly, they should work together fine. And if it's really that much easier for you to get a Hydra, I would let the decision be, do you need to stay with Scart? And if so, do you need sync regeneration? So here's the opinions on that. If you don't need any sync regeneration at all, whatever goes inside the Hydra comes out of it, then maybe if it's already working for you, grab a second one. I think even the 16 port might be able to connect directly into another one. I think there's a cool link port that does that. But if you do need any kind of sync stripping at all, what I would suggest is buying the new G-Scart, the one that's just coming out. You could put a pre-order right away for it. It'll probably arrive to you in a few months. I would turn the sync stripper off on the Hydra. In fact, I would just make the Hydra as dumb as possible, and then run that into the G-Scart and leave the G-Scart's sync regeneration on, because it handles the sync stripping in a totally different way that might be safer overall than your basic LM1881 sync stripper, and it's got some cool new features on it too that I think it's worth it for people that need some kind of sync regeneration. I have had mixed feelings about the Hydra, so the fact that you get the 16 port's awesome. That's certainly something that no other Switch offers. But the one thing I do want to mention is, do you need Scart? And because you can get a 32-port Extron Crosspoint switch. I've seen them as cheap as $200. I've seen them, they're usually like $350, but it's a full 32-port switch that accepts RGB, VGA via RGB HV, and component. And most of the 32 ports have at least 8 outputs that can be used simultaneously and as a matrix. Meaning you could have input 1 going to output 2 at the same time, input 4 is going out to output 8. So it's a pretty crazy device. The problem is that you have to buy extremely expensive console to BNC cables, or either purchase or make your own SCART to BNC adapters. And the 32-port versions, the cable's at least twice as long. So if your average BNC cable's this long, you need it double so it could fit in the spacing of the 32. But I felt like mentioning that because I do know a lot of people's setups that would be by far the best option for them. So they could have, they could reroute things through certain processors. They could have processors for streaming, processors for gaming. Stuff like that's really perfect for people that need all of that at once, that aren't going to be fidgeting with stuff. For me personally, that would be a nightmare because I'm constantly taking out stuff, installing new things, and testing. But I think those are the two things I would look into. Is a 32-port switch something that you would really, a 32-port matrix switch, something you would really benefit from and worth all of the extra cost of cabling? If not, and you need sync regeneration, go for the G-Scart. And if you don't, you're just passing through all your signals like I do, then just get whatever's easiest. Maybe a used G-Scart on eBay, or because once the new ones come out with the sync regeneration, the older ones are going to be on eBay for cheaper, or maybe even a used Hydra. But hopefully I laid out the full scenarios for you so you can make whatever decision fits you best. Neil Patel had a question about PlayStation 3s. He has a backwards compatible PS3, and the fan seems to be kicking in after a few minutes of being on now, so he wants to try and prevent a yellow light of death. So there's a few tips that I can give. The one thing that a lot of people seem to always talk about is making sure to do a fan mod. And I guess that would require it being jailbroken, but basically you mod it so that the fan is always on so that you don't have to worry about it overheating. I think the root of the yellow light of death was two things. It was first that Sony I guess they were afraid people would think it was too loud, so it's programmed inside to not turn its fan on until it gets really, really hot. So by doing a fan mod with a jailbreak, you have the fan turn on when it just gets warm to make sure to keep it from getting, incredibly hot. And the other problem was that it used solder with no lead inside, which is something, non-leaded solder is something most places have switched over to now. They've gotten good at it, but it reacts differently than leaded solder would. So what a few people were doing was called reballing. Now, I'm trying not to nerd out too much, but basically on the graphics and main CPU chips of the PS3 are too small. The pins are too small for a slot, and you can't solder them yourself. You need to use a ball grid array. So what some people were doing was taking those off, removing all of the solder, and then soldering using leaded solder, and a very complicated setup in order to do so. The thought was, by doing this, it'll have a better connection between the CPU and the motherboard, that heat won't affect as much, and that add some better thermal paste, do the fan mod, replace the fan, and now you could have a PS3 that theoretically would last longer than stock. The problem is most of those reballing shops are fakes. The person I went to, I spent $600 to have 2 of them done, and one of them crashed twice. So it was $600 after I had to keep shipping it back. And when he shipped it again, it still didn't work. So I sent it to VoltARS I sent it to him as a joke, as one of the monthly kickback thing that we always joke about. And, when he received it, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? I told him the story, and then I said, don't even open it up, use it for parts if you need it. I was tired of paying so much money for something useless. But that kind of sparked his interest, and he took it all apart, and he said that there were very obvious signs that this place that I had spent so much money to have this PS3 reballed just took a hot air gun and tried to use that trick to heat up the non-leaded solder and get it to stick. That is terrible for a million reasons. Not only did I lose money, because I could have just done that myself, but it warped the motherboard, which is something that a lot of these hot air tricks do. And the way he did it may have damaged some of the components around it. So I guess the best advice I could give to you is try to do a jailbreak and a fan mod yourself, which should be easy because I think fan mod I believe it's software. I believe you could do it in software if it's jailbroken. But the best thing to do overall would be to have a good reballing shop, take it all apart, refurbish it, replace the solder, maybe have them jailbreak it, and then put it all back together with a new fan, new thermal paste. But I have no idea who to trust for that anymore. The place I went to supposedly had a few years of good feedback and then went downhill. There's supposedly a place in Jersey that's good, but I haven't even contacted them, so I'm not really sure. So that's something where if anybody else knows of a good place, please post down below, especially if you've had yours done before and know for a fact it was reballed. So yeah, that's a rough one. Sorry I didn't have any better news. Jason D asked if I could recommend a certain model TCL TV for gaming with the OSSC. That's a tricky question because, with certain TVs react differently to certain consoles, certain modes act differently. So, like for example, on my OLED TV, 5X Genesis works flawless. 5X Super Nintendo won't even boot at all, but 3X and 4X work. So it's kind of strange. The things that I could say that I have tested and remember off the top of my head is that the 2017 TCL TVs tend to have about 15 milliseconds of lag, and the 2018 have about 16 and a half. So both are perfectly reasonable and good for gaming. I'd like 0, but this is, you know, it's reasonable to game on this and not feel a big difference. Tips for getting the lowest latency: turn everything off, turn all processing off, then download the Roku app, connect to the TCL TV, and turn processing off there as well. There's one more thing that if you turn it off in the app will affect latency, at least on on both the 27 and the 2018 TVs. And in fact, if I remember correctly, on the 2017 model, turning whatever setting was on, whatever noise reduction was in only the advanced settings in the app made more of a difference than putting it into game mode. I do know I was told that outside North America, TCLs don't use the Roku app. They have Android, so I don't know how it would work with them. And as far as gaming with the OSSC at 5X, you know, I've heard so many different things, and I don't have my OSSC hooked up to my TCL. I do know that, I think, if I remember correctly, Genesis worked perfect, and I think the 2017 TVs got a little weird with Super Nintendo at 5X, but it definitely worked. But I don't know, I don't remember what SNES I was using. I don't remember if it had any other mods, or if even now with the new OSSC profiles, maybe if you just use the FBX recommended profile settings, that'll fix everything for you. So I guess I would say that my only recommendation is that, you know, as far as I know, those TCL TVs will be very low latency and they will work with the OSSC. But if you have an issue, you might need to run one console at 3X instead of 5X. Well, that's it for this week. For anybody new to my weekly Q&As, please post any questions you have down below under this week's video on the Patreon site. I always disable comments for the Patreon videos because this really is just about the Patreons. And I do make it public for everybody about a month later, but this is all about interacting with my Patreon supporters and trying to show my eternal gratitude to all of you for supporting my channel. So if you have any questions at all, post on the Patreon page of this week where you're seeing this video right now, and not in any of the previous weeks. If you have any new questions, please post in the new video. I don't go back and check the other ones. It's just too much to sift through. Sorry about that. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. None of these videos could happen without you, and thank you very much for participating because I do like these Q&As a lot. See you next time.